Riot Chapter 17. After soaping, rinsing, and blow-drying Gretzky, Brian blockaded him in the laundry room with the safety gate. The wooden frame and the white plastic mesh of the gate made him remember when the twins were small, and Mom penned them with her in the laundry room. The dryer whirled, the warm air, and the lemon scent. He used to play peekaboo through the gate, making the twins giggle while Mom folded clothes. It seemed so long ago. He scratched Gretzky between the ears, left him, and walked slowly up the stairs. He suddenly felt afraid. If Dad woke up and they started talking, maybe Dad would fly out of control. After today, after what Dad had done at the housing camp, how could Brian ever trust him? Tiptoeing quietly across the kitchen floor and down the hallway, Brian passed his parents' bedroom. Through the shut door, he heard his dad's breathing. He was asleep. Brian went back to the kitchen, ladled a bowl of stew from the stove, and ate. Though it was still early, he was exhausted. He walked to his bedroom, set his backpack at the foot of the top bunk, and climbed up. With his clothes on, he crawled under the covers and closed his eyes, waiting for sleep to come and cover up his confusion. For nearly an hour, he tossed and turned, opening his eyes and glancing at his backpack, and then shutting them again. In his mind, the men shouting and swearing filled the air. He pictured them with their bats stretched high, and then their bats turned to stones. Crack, ting. He remembered his own stones flung with a solid aim at the guardhouse. Why did he think he was any better than the rest of them? His actions had been wrong, too. Last Sunday, the scripture reading had been about the crowd that gathered in the dusty streets shouting, "Stone her, stone her," at the weeping woman who lay crumpled on the ground. The shouts grew louder and louder. Suddenly, the crowd quieted. Nearby, drawing in the dust with a stick, was Jesus. The man held their stones high, waiting for him to speak. Finally, he rose to his feet and faced the crowd angrily. "Whoever is without sin," he said, "throw the first stone." The men lowered their arms and dropped their stones. One by one, they slipped away. Maybe some things weren't for kids or adults. Maybe this whole union battle wasn't about winning or losing, but about loving your neighbor, about simply dropping the stones. Dad, if only you'd walked away, things could have been different. When the kitchen door opened and Mom's feet softly swept the hallway, Brian closed his eyes again and tried to sleep. When he climbed down his bunk ladder the next morning, Brian's legs trembled and his stomach growled. What day was it? Sunday? It seemed impossible that only one day had passed since yesterday morning. The sound of spoons clinking against the side of a cereal bowl came from the kitchen. He pulled on jeans and a sweatshirt, and he stood behind his closed door a moment, hesitating. How could he face his father? But sooner or later he'd have to. He stepped out, used the bathroom, and walked down the hallway toward the kitchen. The house was filled with the fragrance of skunk. In their terry robes, Mom and Dad were at the dining room table with their cups of steaming coffee. Dad was slouched forward, holding his white cup in both hands, as though warming himself on a cold winter morning. His skin was gray, hair rumpled, and face unshaven. Brian cleared his throat. His parents had never looked so tired. "Hi." Dad glanced up, not lifting his head. He didn't say a word. "Good morning, Brian," Mom said. "Want some cereal?" "Sure." He sat down, poured himself a bowl of Life cereal, and set the box in front of him, pretending to study the maze on the back. He wished he could find a simple way out of the mess he was in. Could he forget all about what he recorded on the tape? Could he do nothing? The videotape was a powder keg waiting to be ignited. A car pulled into the driveway. The engine quieted, and one car door, then another, opened and slammed shut. The doorbell rang. Gretzky jumped off the couch and started barking. Brian looked around the corner of his cereal box at Dad. He didn't move. He just stared into his cup of coffee. Mom pushed back her chair and then pushed her hair with her fingers. She glanced at Dad, sighed, and went to the door. "Good morning, Mrs. Grant." It was Sheriff Hunter. Standing beside him was another officer. "Is your husband here?" Gretzky stood next to Mom, barking. "Stan," Mom whispered, turning around. Brian ducked behind his cereal box. He didn't want Sheriff Hunter to see him. Dad rose from his chair and stood tall. He crossed his arms over his chest. "Hi, Carl," he said. His voice was low, without a trace of warmth. "What's up?" "Stan," the sheriff said, "you're under arrest for arson, criminal damage, and rioting. You have the right to remain silent." Dad's forehead furrowed in a mass of lines. "What?" Sheriff Hunter continued, reading from a slip of paper. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. You have the right to attorney. When you are interviewed, if you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. Having these rights in mind, would you be willing to talk to us?" "Hey, now you listen," Dad said, punching the air with his right fist. "You can't come into my home and arrest me." His chest heaved and his voice grew louder. "You're arresting the wrong man. I was born and raised here. You know that. It's those other guys, the rats, you should be after." He paused, his arms dropped to his side, and he spoke more softly. "Besides, what evidence do you have?" Eyewitness, Sam, the sheriff told him. I wish I could say the same for others. Most came from out of town. Brian hung his head and chewed on his thumb and knuckle. He felt like he was shrinking, growing smaller and smaller in his chair. He couldn't believe what was happening. And how could his father think he was innocent? How could he defend himself? When Mom stepped to Brian's side and placed her hand on his shoulder, something broke in him. He couldn't be strong for her, too. He slipped from the table and ran to his bedroom. Can I get dressed? He heard his father ask, almost in a whisper.